Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's emotions directly powered his quirk. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that whipped across the rooftop was a lonely, indifferent thing. It tugged at the lapels of Izuku Midoriya's black gakurin, a chilling counterpoint to the firestorm of despair raging in his chest. Before him stood the emaciated, skeletal form of the man who was, impossibly, All Might. The truth of the hero's catastrophic injury, the ticking clock on his power, was a revelation so immense it had nearly shattered Izuku's perception of the world. But it was the words that followed, the answer to a question he had carried like a lead weight his entire life, that had truly broken him. So no. I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. Each word was a hammer blow against the fragile stained glass image of his dreams. He saw the pity in All Might's eyes, the weary resignation of a man who had seen too much of reality's harshness. It was a kind cruelty, but cruelty all the same. The hero offered a pragmatic alternative: become a police officer, a doctor. Good, noble professions that help people. But for Izuku, it was like telling a bird with clipped wings that it could become a master swimmer. It wasn't the same. It would never be the same. The world seemed to lose its color, its sound muted to a dull, hollow roar in his ears. He could only nod, his throat too tight to form a response. The chasm that had opened inside him was vast and echoing, a void where 14 years of desperate, fervent hope had once resided. He barely registered All Might's departure, the clanging of the rooftop door a distant, funereal toll. He was alone. Utterly and completely alone with the ghost of his ambition. He sank to his knees, the rough concrete biting into his trousers. The notebooks, filled with meticulous analysis and hopeful scribbles, felt like relics of a dead faith. For a few, timeless minutes he felt nothing but the cold, empty finality of it all. The end. Then, an explosion rocked the city. The sound, a crump of concussive force followed by a plume of dark smoke, jolted him from his stupor. It was nearby. His body moved before his mind could process the why. It was instinct, a compulsion etched into his very soul. He scrambled to the edge of the roof, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. Below, in the narrow commercial street he'd just been dragged from, chaos was erupting. People were screaming, running. And at the center of it, a familiar, monstrous form of bubbling green sludge, the villain. The one All Might had captured. It had escaped. A cold dread, sharp and piercing, lanced through the numbness. It was his fault. He had distracted All Might, wasted his time, and because of him. His eyes locked onto the victim trapped within the suffocating morass. Spiky, ash-blonde hair. A face contorted in a furious, terrified snarl. Explosions, muffled and weak, burst from the villain's gelatinous body. Kaken. The world snapped back into sharp, terrifying focus. He saw the pro-heroes on the scene, Kamui Woods, Death Arms, Empty Lady, all unable to act. The fire, the tight space, the hostage. They were waiting for someone with the right quirk. Waiting. And Bakugo was dying. His explosive struggles were getting weaker, his eyes, wide with a panic Izuku had never seen before, were pleading. And in that instant, the hollow chasm inside Izuku Midoriya was filled. It wasn't filled with hope, or joy, or any of the bright, warm things he'd clung to for years. It was filled with a tidal wave of pure, unthinking desperation. A white-hot, selfless terror for another person's life that eclipsed his own despair, his own safety, his own powerlessness. He didn't remember deciding to run. One moment he was on the rooftop, the next his feet were pounding against the pavement, his yellow backpack slapping against his spine. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouts of the heroes. His mind was a blank slate save for a single, screaming imperative: save him. He saw Bakugo's eyes meet his. Surprise flickered through the panic. Izuku's mind raced, pulling from the terabytes of hero data stored in his brain. Page 25. The villain's weakness. Eyes and teeth are solid. He swung his backpack, a clumsy, desperate arc, and hurled it with all his might. It struck the villain square in the eye. The monster recoiled with a gurgling roar, its grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Izuku was there, his fingers clawing uselessly at the sludge, trying to find purchase, trying to dig his friend out. "What the hell are you doing, Deku?" Bakugo choked out, his voice raw. "I don't know." Izuku sobbed, tears and snot streaming down his face. "My legs they just moved. I couldn't watch you die." He looked up at his childhood friend, his bully, his rival. And for the first time, he didn't see a figure of towering strength. He saw a scared kid, just like him. And his expression, in that frantic moment, wasn't one of scorn. It was one of pure, unadulterated desperation. It was then that a familiar, powerful hand clamped down on his shoulder. "I was a fool!" A voice boomed, resonant with shame and newfound resolve. All Might, no longer gaunt and skeletal but his full, heroic self, stood behind them. "I preached the tenets of heroism, yet I failed to live by them myself. A hero always risks their life to do what's right." Detroit. Smosh! The punch changed the weather. The sheer air pressure dispersed the villain into 1,000 harmless splatters, extinguishing the flames and causing a sudden downpour. In the aftermath, Izuku was scolded by the pros while Bakugo was praised for his endurance. The irony was a bitter pill. As he trudged home, the emptiness began to creep back in, heavier than before. He hadn't done anything, not really. He had just been a reckless idiot. He had failed. "I am here!" The voice made him jump so hard he nearly tripped over his own feet. All Might, in his muscle form, skidded to a halt before him. "To apologize! And for a proposal!" he boomed, before deflating with a hiss of steam back into his skeletal form. He wiped a trickle of blood from his mouth. "That story I told you on the roof, it was true, but there was something I didn't tell you." He looked at Izuku, his eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce right through him. "My quirk is not one I was born with. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next. Its name is one for all." Izuku's mind blanked. A passed-down quirk? It sounded like something out of a comic book. "The heroes at the scene, they were brave," All Might continued, his voice low and serious. "But they were frozen by pragmatism. You, on the other hand, you, a quirkless, terrified boy, were the only one who ran in. You moved because your soul compelled you to. In that moment, you were more of a hero than anyone else there." Izuku's breath hitched. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and sudden. "Your heart, it's a furnace of heroic spirit, my boy. I have searched for a worthy successor for a long time. Someone with the drive not to fight, but to save. And I have found him." All Might pointed a long, bony finger directly at Izuku's chest. "Young Midoriya, I deem you worthy of my power. My quirk is yours if you'll have it." The world, which had been gray and muted, exploded into a kaleidoscope of impossible color. The words Izuku had ached to hear his entire life, the validation he craved more than air itself, were finally being spoken. Not just that he could be a hero, but that he was chosen to be one, to be the successor to the symbol of peace himself. A sob tore itself from his lungs, a sound that felt like it was ripping him apart and putting him back together all at once. It was a deluge of emotion, gratitude so profound it was painful, joy so bright it was blinding, determination so fierce it felt like steel forging in his core. All of it crashed together, a tsunami of feeling that left him gasping, weeping, and nodding his head so vigorously he thought it might come off. "Yes," he finally managed to croak, the single word carrying the weight of a lifetime of yearning. "Yes, please." All Might smiled, a genuine, relieved expression that crinkled the weary lines around his eyes. "A good answer. No time to waste, then. Meet me at the Dagoba Municipal Beach Park at dawn. Your journey to inheriting One for All begins now." He turned to leave, but paused, looking back at the still sobbing boy. A flicker of something, awe perhaps, or a touch of apprehension, crossed his face. This boy, All Might thought, a strange premonition prickling at the back of his mind. He doesn't just feel. He burns with it. I hope the power can handle such a vessel." 2 weeks later, under the pre-dawn sky, that hope was about to be tested in the most spectacular and terrifying way imaginable. The 10-month training regimen had been grueling. All Might's American dream plan was a Herculean task, to clean the entire, trash-filled coastline to forge Izuku's body into a suitable vessel for the raw power of One for All. Izuku had pushed himself past every conceivable limit. His muscles screamed, his bones ached, but his spirit soared. Every piece of rusted metal he hauled, every defunct appliance he dragged, was a step closer to his dream. And now, on the morning of the UA entrance exam, the beach was pristine. The rising sun glinted off a clean, unbroken stretch of sand. All Might, in his muscle form, stood atop a cleared mound, his laughter echoing across the shore. "Excellent work, my boy! Truly magnificent! You did it!" Izuku, lean and corded with new muscle, collapsed onto the sand, his chest heaving. He had done it. He had actually done it. "No," All Might said, landing softly beside him and plucking a single strand of his golden hair. "For your reward." He held it out to the exhausted boy. "Eat this," Izuku stared. "Huh! To inherit my power, you have to ingest some of my DNA. That's how it works," All Might explained, his grin unwavering. "Now hurry! We're running out of time." Izuku, too tired and too overwhelmed to question the absurdity, took the hair. This was it. The culmination of everything. He closed his eyes, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He thought of his mother's worried face, Bakugo's angry sneer, and All Might's unwavering belief in him. He thought of the people he would save, the hero he would become. He placed the hair on his tongue and swallowed. For a moment, there was nothing. A profound anticlimax. He felt the same. Tired. Sore. A little grossed out. "Did it work?" he asked, looking up at his mentor. All Might gave him a thumbs up. "It should have. The power will take a moment to settle in. Just focus on that feeling, my boy. That feeling of accomplishment. That pride, that euphoric joy of achieving your goal. Let it fill you." Izuku did. He let himself truly feel it. The 10 months of brutal, back-breaking labor. The impossible goal, now achieved. The clean beach spreading before him. The fact that he was, at long last, no longer quirkless. All Might, his idol, was smiling at him. He was going to UA. He was going to be a hero. The joy didn't just fill him. It detonated. It began as a warmth in his stomach, a pleasant hum that quickly escalated into a roaring inferno. It was a supernova of emotion, a dam of feeling built over a lifetime of suppression and longing, finally breaking. Gratitude, triumph, hope, love, determination, it all ignited at once. "Whoa, easy there, my boy!" All Might chuckled, sensing the shift. "Just a little." Oh, the world went green. A torrent of brilliant, emerald energy erupted from Izuku Midoriya's body. It wasn't a gentle glow. It was a violent, uncontrolled explosion of light and force. The air crackled, smelling sharply of ozone and summer lightning. A high-pitched, keening sound, like 1,000 tuning forks struck at once, tore through the dawn quiet. The sand around him was blasted away in a perfect circle, creating a shallow crater. All Might's eyes went wide with shock. He threw his arms up to shield his face, his heroic physique braced against a physical wave of pressure that felt like the shockwave from a bomb. He was pushed back several feet, his boots digging trenches in the sand. "Young Midoriya!" he roared, his voice barely audible over the shriek of raw power. The explosion wasn't aimed at anything. It was simply an outward burst of pure, unadulterated euphoria made manifest. The wave of emerald energy shot across the water, causing it to boil and hiss. It slammed into the concrete retaining wall of the coastal road high above, spiderwebbing it with cracks. Further on, in the windows of a sleeping apartment building a quarter of a mile away, glass panes vibrated, then shattered, raining down onto the empty streets below. Izuku was floating a few inches off the ground at the center of the storm, his arms outstretched, his head thrown back. His eyes were wide open and glowing with the same terrifying green light. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't even conscious of what was happening. He was simply lost in the single, overwhelming feeling of pure, ecstatic joy. Then, through the roaring tempest of his own power, a new feeling pricked at him. It was a distant pinprick of confusion. What is this sound? Why is the ground shaking? That confusion blossomed into a cold, sharp spike of fear. He saw All Might's terrified face. He heard the distant tinkle of breaking glass. He realized, with dawning horror, that this cataclysm was coming from him. The fear hit his euphoria like a bucket of ice water. The light show, the pressure wave, the keening sound, it all vanished in an instant. The emerald energy receded back into his body as if it had never been there, leaving behind a profound, ringing silence. Gravity reasserted itself, and Izuku dropped to the sand with a soft thud. He was just a boy again. Quirkless. Powerless. The immense energy was gone. He scrambled up, his heart hammering against his ribs with terror. What was that? All Might, what happened? All Might slowly lowered his arms, his face a mask of disbelief and profound shock. He looked from the crater, to the cracked sea wall, to the distant, damaged building, and then back to the trembling boy before him. The sheer, untamed force of that blast, it was comparable to one of his own lesser smashes. From a kid who had held the power for less than 30 seconds, this was not the one for all he knew. This was something else. Something wilder, more dangerous. My boy, All Might said, his voice a low, shaken whisper. He took a staggering step forward, placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder, as if to make sure he was real. I believe the quirk has mutated. He looked at Izuku's wide, terrified eyes, and the pieces clicked into place. The boy's overwhelming emotional state. The explosive debut of the power. The sudden cessation when fear took over. It didn't just find a vessel, young Midoriya, All Might said, his mind racing. It found a furnace. It's not just stockpiling physical power anymore. I think it's latched onto your spirit. It's using your heart as its fuel. He swallowed hard, the weight of his next words settling on him like a shroud. What have I done? The 10 months leading up to the UA exam had been a marathon of physical conditioning. The 10 hours before the exam became a frantic, desperate cram session in emotional temperance. They sat on the now clean sand, the sun a gentle warmth on their skin, a stark contrast to the cold dread pooling in Izuku's stomach. All Might, looking older and more tired than ever, tried to explain his hypothesis. One for All's core purpose is to stockpile and transfer power, he explained, pacing back and forth. But it has always been more than just a battery. It carries the will, the spirit of the previous users. My master, Nana Shimura, she always said it had a consciousness of its own. It seems that when it entered you, someone with such a powerful emotional core, it adapted. It found a new, more potent energy source than simple kinetic stockpiling. My emotions? Izuku squeaked, looking down at his trembling hands. So that explosion, that was because I was happy? Not just happy, my boy. Euphoric. Overwhelmed. All Might corrected grimly. And when you felt fear, it vanished. The connection is direct. The stronger the feeling, it seems, the stronger the output. He stopped pacing and looked Izuku dead in the eye. This is both a tremendous gift and an unimaginable curse. If you can master it, your potential could exceed even my own, but if you can't, you are a walking natural disaster. A danger to yourself and everyone around you. The weight of that responsibility was crushing. Izuku felt a wave of despair wash over him. His dream was finally in his grasp, and it was a live grenade with a faulty pin. So what do I do? He whispered. The exam is today. I can't go in there like this. What if I get excited? Or scared? I could hurt someone. This is what we must figure out. No, All Might said, his tone shifting back into that of a mentor. He pointed at a large, rusted washing machine they had missed, half buried in the sand near the seawall. Our new training starts now. I want you to move that. Izuku stared at him. With the quirk? Yes. But listen carefully. Do not think about the exam. Do not think about being a hero. Do not let yourself feel excited or anxious. I want you to clear your mind. Find a state of calm. A baseline, your 0 point, as it were. Izuku nodded, took a deep breath, and walked over to the washing machine. He gripped its sharp, rusted edge. He tried to empty his mind, but it was a maelstrom of anxiety. The exam. Everyone will have amazing quirks. What if I fail? What if I blow up the whole testing center? He pulled. Nothing. He felt no power, no hum, no energy, just the unyielding weight of the metal and the strain in his arms. He felt a familiar, sinking feeling of hopelessness. He was just useless Deku all over again. I can't, he said, his voice cracking. I just feel scared. And sad. I see. All Might murmured, stroking his chin. So negative, passive emotions like despair yield no power. That's good to know, I suppose. It's the active, potent emotions we need to worry about. Alright, new approach. Forget being calm for a moment. Try again. Izuku gripped the machine again. He tried to summon a feeling, any feeling. He thought about his 10 months of work, the pride of cleaning the beach. A tiny spark of that previous euphoria flickered within him. A low, green hum vibrated through his hands. The washing machine budged, scraping a few inches through the sand. I did it! He gasped, a surge of genuine pride and accomplishment swelling in his chest. It moved! The green hum instantly escalated into a sharp whine. An uncontrolled burst of energy, a fraction of the morning's explosion, but still immensely powerful, shot from his hands. The washing machine was launched backward, tumbling end over end through the air with a shriek of tortured metal before crashing into the waves with a massive splash. Whoa! Izuku yelped, stumbling back, his hands tingling. Too much! Too much pride! All Might shouted, waving his hands. You see? The moment the feeling became too strong, you lost control. You cannot let yourself be overcome. You must be the master of the emotion, not the other way around. Izuku's shoulders slumped. This was impossible. How was he supposed to use a power fueled by his feelings while simultaneously feeling nothing at all? Frustration began to curdle in his gut, anger at his own incompetence. He clenched his fists, and a strange, sputtering static of dark red energy crackled around his knuckles. It was jagged and unstable, arcing and fizzling out with no coherent force. It felt ugly. Anger. All Might noted, his expression serious. Unstable. Volatile. Avoid that one at all costs. It feels corrupting. Izuku took deep, shuddering breaths, trying to quell the storm inside him. This was a nightmare. One more time, my boy, All Might said, his voice softer now. He walked over and stood beside Izuku, pointing at a large, discarded truck tire nearby. Don't think about the grand achievement. Don't focus on the pride of the result. Focus on the process. Feel the rough texture of the rubber under your fingers. Feel the solid ground beneath your feet. And then, summon a single, simple feeling, the quiet, steady determination to see this one small task through. Not triumph. Not excitement. Just satisfaction in the work itself. A low, steady burn. Can you do that? Izuku closed his eyes. He blocked out the exam, the fear, the frustration. He focused on the tire. On the feeling of the coarse rope he'd looped around it. He took a breath, and then another. He didn't try to summon the lightning of joy or the fire of anger. He reached for something quieter. The feeling he'd had every morning for 10 months as he stepped onto the beach. A simple, stubborn resolve. This needs to be done. So I will do it. He pulled. A low, gentle hum, the color of new spring leaves, enveloped his arms. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't volatile. It was a smooth, consistent river of power. The tire, heavy and waterlogged, began to move. He grunted with effort, leaning back, and dragged it steadily across the sand, leaving a deep furrow in his wake. The energy flowed, controlled and constant, for the entire 10 feet until the tire was next to All Might. As soon as he stopped pulling, the power receded, leaving him breathing heavily, but not drained. He looked at his hands, then at All Might, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. I think I get it, he panted. All Might nodded, a relieved smile finally returning to his face. Good. That is your key. Steady, focused determination. It's not as powerful as the explosive emotions, but it is controllable. That is your weapon for today. Go into that exam and find your 0 point. And when you need the power, summon only that feeling. The quiet will to succeed. Can you do that? Izuku looked toward the distant, shining towers of UA High School. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach. But now, it was accompanied by something else. A fragile, tentative sliver of control. He had a path, however narrow and treacherous it might be. "I'll try," he said, his voice filled with a new, quiet determination. His dream was no longer a simple, shining beacon. It was a raging, unpredictable forge. And his own heart was the volatile fuel it craved. To become a hero, Izuku Midoriya would not just have to build his body, or even his mind. He would have to learn to master the very essence of his soul. The gates of UA High School were less an entryway and more a monument to aspiration itself. They towered over the arriving students, massive structures of steel and glass that seemed to cleave the ordinary world from the extraordinary one within. The sun, climbing higher in the crisp morning sky, caught the iconic UA emblem, casting a brilliant glare that made Izuku Midoriya's eyes water. Or perhaps it was the overwhelming pressure constricting his chest that brought the moisture to his eyes. He wasn't sure. He stood apart from the throng of chattering, confident examinees, his brand-new gym clothes feeling stiff and foreign on his skin. In his mind, he was a fraud, a stowaway who had snuck into this hallowed ground. His right hand was clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles were white, a desperate, physical anchor against the churning sea of his emotions. 0 point, he chanted internally, the words a frantic mantra. Find the 0 point. Quiet, steady determination. The feeling of the tire. The weight of the rope. Smooth, consistent, controlled. It was a useless effort. The air itself was electric, charged with the crackling ambition of hundreds of teenagers, each one a powerhouse of unique abilities. The excitement was a tangible thing, a roaring tide that threatened to sweep his fragile mental dam away. He could feel it trying to hook into his quirk, to ignite the volatile fuel of his heart. A nervous tremor ran down his spine, and with it came the telltale sign of his failing control. A flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible pulse of green energy, no bigger than a firefly, zipped from his shoulder and vanished with a faint FZZZZT sound. It left behind the sharp, clean scent of ozone and a tiny, singed pinprick on the sleeve of his tracksuit. His breath hitched. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself to breathe. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. All Might's frantic, last-minute coaching was a lifeline he clung to, but the waves of emotion kept coming. There was the boy with engine calves, radiating an aura of intense, disciplined focus. There was the girl with pink skin, exuding a bubbly, infectious enthusiasm. Every one of them was a potential trigger. He felt like a man made of gunpowder walking through a fireworks display. Out of my way, extras. The voice, a low and familiar growl, cut through the din. Izuku's eyes snapped open. Katsuki Bakugo shouldered his way through the crowd, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. A thunderous scowl etched onto his features. His gaze swept the area and landed on Izuku. For a split second, their eyes met. Bakugo's usual expression of contemptuous rage was still there, but beneath it, Izuku saw something else flicker in its depths, a sliver of confusion, of suspicion, a memory of a sludge villain and a useless, charging Deku. He said nothing, simply scoffing and turning away, but the brief encounter was enough. A jolt of pure, undiluted anxiety shot through Izuku. His oldest tormentor, the source of so much of his despair and, paradoxically, his motivation, was here. The complex cocktail of fear, resentment, and a strange, lingering sense of camaraderie was a potent, dangerous brew. Another flicker of green energy, this one larger, danced along his forearm like static electricity before fizzing out. He yelped softly, and slapped his own arm as if to extinguish a flame. He needed to get away, to find a quiet corner, to recenter himself before he accidentally blew a hole in the courtyard. He took a hasty step forward, his mind entirely consumed by his internal battle. His foot caught on an uneven paving stone, the world tilted. Time seemed to slow as he flailed, his arms pinwheeling uselessly. He was going to fall, to make a complete fool of himself in front of everyone before the exam even began. The humiliation was a hot flash, and he felt a dangerous hum start to build in his chest. Suddenly, a light touch on his back. The sensation of falling stopped. He hung suspended in midair, a few inches from the ground. "Whoa there! Are you okay?" a bright, cheerful voice asked. He was gently lowered to his feet. He turned, his face burning with embarrassment, to see a girl with a round, kind face and a permanent rosy blush on her cheeks. Her brown hair was cut into a cute, chin-length bob. She clasped her hands together, smiling warmly. "It's my quirk," she explained, wiggling her fingers, the pads of which were slightly raised. "Sorry for using it on you without asking, but it's a bad omen to fall right before a test, right?" Izuku's brain short-circuited. A girl. A cute girl. Was talking to him. Was being nice to him. The anxiety and fear were momentarily washed away by a completely new and terrifying emotion. A shy, flustered wave of gratitude mixed with acute social panic. Bzzzt. A spark of emerald light, the size of a coin this time, jumped from his knuckle and struck the ground, leaving a tiny, blackened scorch mark on the pavement between their feet. The girl's eyes widened slightly. "Oh. A static quirk? Cool. Yeah, thanks, sorry, gotta go." Izuku stammered, the words tumbling out in a single, mortifying burst. He turned and half ran, half stumbled toward the auditorium doors, his heart now a three-front war between anxiety, residual fear of Bakugo, and the mortifying new sensation of talking to a girl. This was going to be a disaster. The orientation hall was vast, dark, and filled to the brim with nervous energy. On stage, bathed in a rock star-level spotlight, was the voice hero, Present Mike. "For all you examinee listeners tuning in, welcome to my live show!" he screamed, his voice shaking the very foundations of the building. "Everybody say hey!" A dead, awkward silence answered him. Izuku shrank down in his seat, trying to make himself as small as possible. The sheer volume was a physical assault, rattling his teeth and making the volatile energy under his skin feel like it was fizzing in a shaken soda bottle. He clutched his exam ticket, focusing on the texture of the paper, the sharp corners, anything to ground himself. Present Mike, undeterred by the lack of audience participation, launched into an explanation of the practical exam. 3 types of villain bots, worth 1, 2, and 3 points respectively. The goal was to rack up as many points as possible in the allotted time. Simple. Straightforward. For anyone else. For Izuku, it was a minefield. The thrill of battle, the joy of success, the fear of failure, all of it was poison. He had to be a monk in the middle of a war zone. And finally, there's the 4th villain type. Present Mike continued, a massive silhouette appearing on the screen behind him. It was colossal, dwarfing the buildings around it. This guy is a gimmick, an obstacle worth 0 points. Think of him like a thwomp from Super Mario. My advice? Just run away. A student a few rows ahead shot to his feet, his hand raised ramrod straight. It was the tall, well-built boy with engine exhaust sticking out of his calves. He was the picture of stern propriety. "Excuse me, sir, I have a question," he boomed, his voice almost as loud as the pro heroes. "On the printout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a gross oversight for Japan's most prestigious hero academy. Such an error is the height of shame." He then pivoted, pointing a rigid, accusatory finger directly at Izuku. "And you," he declared, his voice ringing through the silent hall. "With the messy green hair. You have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. It is distracting and disrespectful to the other examinees. If you are not here to take this seriously, then I must ask that you leave." Every head in the vicinity turned to stare at Izuku. 100 pairs of eyes, judging, scrutinizing. The world narrowed to a pinprick. The low hum of Present Mike's microphone, the shuffling of feet, the collective gaze of the room, it all converged into a single point of unbearable pressure right behind his sternum. His heart rate spiked. The fizzing sensation intensified, a frantic, chaotic energy building, seeking an outlet. He could feel it, a nascent, uncontrolled power begging to be released. Despair and panic were a toxic flood, and he was drowning. "It's over," a voice in his head whispered. "You can't do this. You're going to lose control right here and get kicked out before you even see a single robot." He gripped the edge of his seat, his knuckles bloodless, his breathing ragged. The power was sputtering useless. The fear was too strong, too overwhelming. It wasn't an active, lashing out emotion like anger. It was a paralytic, a cold blanket that smothered the quirk's flame, leaving behind nothing but cold, powerless dread. He didn't even hear President Mike answer the student's question. He was lost, adrift in an ocean of his own failure. The practical exam began not with a bang, but with a silent, sliding gait. Izuku stood before the massive entrance to Battle Center B, a sprawling, hyper-realistic cityscape replica. The other examinees were crouched, ready to sprint, muscles coiled like springs. Izuku was just standing there. His limbs felt heavy, filled with lead. The confidence he'd seen in the others had evaporated any lingering shred of his own. "All right, go!" President Mick's voice screamed from unseen speakers. "The test has started! What are you waiting for? There are no countdowns in a real fight!" The crowd surged forward, a tidal wave of quirks and bodies vanishing into the concrete canyons of the mock city. Within seconds, Izuku was left alone in the dust, the sound of distant explosions and crashing metal already echoing back to him. He was late. He was already behind. Panic, sharp and cold, gripped him. He forced his legs to move, running awkwardly into the city. It was chaos. A boy with a laser navel blasted a one-pointer to scrap metal. The pink-skinned girl from before melted a two-pointer with a spray of acid. Everywhere he looked, students were racking up points with practiced ease. He rounded a corner and came face to face with a one-point bot. It swiveled towards him, its single red optical sensor glowing menacingly. "Okay. Do it now," he told himself, his voice trembling in his own head. 0 point. Steady determination. The tire. The rope. Just move it. He planted his feet, drew back his fist, and tried to summon that low, steady burn. He focused on the simple goal: disable the robot. He channeled the feeling of quiet resolve. Nothing. A pathetic, barely there flicker of green, like a dying ember, sputtered around his knuckles and immediately died. His punch, devoid of any power, connected with the robot's metal chassis with a dull, painful thunk. The force of the impact rattled up his arm, making his teeth ache. The robot didn't even wobble. It raised its own metallic arm to strike. Izuku shrieked and scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on the pavement. Before the robot could attack, a blur of blue and silver shot past. The engine-legged boy from the orientation delivered a flying kick that tore through the robot's torso, sending sparks and wires everywhere. 45 points. The boy muttered to himself, not even glancing at Izuku before rocketing down the street in search of more prey. Izuku just sat there on the ground, his hand throbbing, his heart a cold, dead stone in his chest. It wasn't working. The quirk wasn't responding. His fear, his overwhelming sense of inadequacy, was like a kill switch. It was a stronger, more dominant emotion than the fragile determination he was trying to summon. He was trying to light a candle in a blizzard. He was quirkless all over again, only this time, it was worse. The power was in him, a vast, sleeping ocean of potential, and he couldn't even produce a single drop. He was a failure on a cosmic scale. The next several minutes were a blur of panicked survival. He ran. He dodged falling debris as other students fought their epic battles above and around him. He saw a smaller boy with purple balls for hair get cornered and, acting on pure instinct, threw a piece of rubble to distract the robot, allowing the boy to escape. No points. He helped a girl whose leg was pinned by a piece of a fallen sign, straining with all his normal human strength to lift it off her. No points. He was acting like a rescue worker, not a hero candidate, a background character in someone else's story. 5 minutes remaining! President Mick's voice boomed, a death knell to Izuku's chances. 5 minutes. And he had 0 points. 0 rescue points, 0 villain points. Nothing. Despair washed over him, thick and suffocating. It was over. All of it. The 10 months of training, All Might's belief in him, the promise he made. It was all for nothing. He had been given the greatest gift in the world, and he was too weak, too pathetic, too scared to even use it. He leaned against a wall in a quiet alley, the sounds of battle growing more distant as the other students cleared the area. He slid to the ground, pulling his knees to his chest, the shame and disappointment so heavy he could barely breathe. He was going to fail. Then, the ground began to shake. It started as a low, deep rumble, a vibration that hummed through the soles of his shoes. It grew rapidly, escalating into a violent tremor that rattled the buildings around him. Dust and pebbles rained down from the rooftops. It wasn't an earthquake. It was footsteps. Massive, earth-shattering footsteps. He looked up, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. A shadow fell over him, blotting out the sun. Rising from behind a block of buildings at the end of the street was a figure of truly biblical proportions. The zero-pointer. It was bigger than he could have ever imagined from the diagram. A moving skyscraper of dark green metal and complex machinery, it dwarfed the 7-story buildings it was now smashing through as if they were made of cardboard. Its head, a massive block of sensors and optics, scanned the battlefield. It was a force of nature, an avatar of overwhelming, pointless destruction. His first instinct, the one President Mike had advised, was to run. And he did. He scrambled to his feet and turned to flee, joining the stream of other examinees who were wisely doing the same. "It's the zero-pointer! Get out of here! There's no point in fighting that thing!" He ran, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm of pure terror. He just needed to get away, to find a quiet place to hide and wait for the clock to run out on his failure. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The robot was still coming, its massive legs kicking up clouds of debris. In that cloud, he saw a flash of brown and pink. He skidded to a halt. It was the girl from the entrance. The kind girl with the gravity quirk. She was on the ground, a large slab of concrete pinning her leg. She was trying to push it off, her face pale with pain and panic. The robot's massive foot was rising, preparing to take its next step, a step that would land directly where she lay trapped. Time stopped. The shouts of the other students, the roar of the robot, the pounding of his own heart, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. The world narrowed to a single, horrific image, a kind person in mortal danger. In that instant, the chasm of his despair, the cold, empty void of his failure, was not just filled. It was obliterated. A new emotion, an emotion so powerful and pure it burned away everything else, erupted from the core of his being. It wasn't anger. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even the steady determination he had tried and failed to summon. It was a tidal wave of pure, selfless, protective desperation. It was the fierce, instinctual cry of a soul that could not, would not, stand by and watch someone get hurt. All Might's words from the beach echoed in his mind, not as a memory, but as a living truth. You moved because your soul compelled you to. He didn't think about his quirk. He didn't think about points, or passing, or failing. He didn't think about his own safety. His entire consciousness, his entire being, condensed into a single, screaming imperative that eclipsed all else. Save her, the universe answered. The air around Izuku Midoriya didn't just crackle with energy. It ripped apart. The ground beneath his feet fractured, spider-webbing outward in a perfect circle as a column of raw, untamed power erupted from him. It was a furious, brilliant emerald green, so bright it was blinding, laced with jagged tendrils of white-hot lightning. The temperature in the alley spiked, the air superheating into a shimmering haze. A sound like 1,000 sonic booms happening at once tore through the city, a physical wave of sound that shattered every remaining window for 3 blocks. He didn't jump. He detonated. His legs, gorged with an impossible amount of power, launched him from the ground. He wasn't a person anymore. He was a human cannonball, a living missile of green energy. He shot into the air, the force of his launch leaving 2 deep, smoking craters where his feet had been. He flew past the 3rd story, the 5th, the 7th, climbing higher and higher until he was level with the zero-pointer's impassive, monstrous head. He drew back his right arm. The sleeve of his tracksuit disintegrated, burned away by the sheer aura his limb was producing. His entire arm glowed with the same terrifying, emerald light, the power so immense it seemed to bend the light around it. He could feel his bones groaning under the strain, threatening to turn to dust before he even made impact. He didn't care. He put every ounce of that desperate, protective instinct, every fiber of his being that screamed save her, into one single point. His fist connected with the robot's faceplate. The result was not a punch. It was a cataclysm. There was no clang of metal. At the point of impact, the robot's armored head didn't dent or buckle, it flash vaporized. The metal turned to incandescent plasma in a nanosecond. The energy from Izuku's fist didn't stop there. It blasted through the robot, a solid beam of destructive emerald light that exited out the back of its torso, continuing its trajectory until it slammed into a building a half-mile outside the testing grounds, blowing a perfectly circular hole through its center. The shockwave came a moment later. It was not a gust of wind. It was a solid wall of force. It tore the rest of the Zero-Pointer's chassis apart, sending multi-ton chunks of metal flying like shrapnel. The street below buckled and cracked. The surrounding buildings had their facades sheared clean off. The other examinees, even those a block away, were thrown from their feet by the sheer, raw pressure. For a single, blinding moment, there was only light and the deafening roar of annihilation. Then, an equally deafening silence. High in the air, suspended at the apex of his trajectory, Izuku Midoriya hung for a fraction of a second. His mission was complete. The threat was gone, and with the desperate emotion now spent, the power vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The pain hit him like a freight train. His right arm was a ruined, mangled wreck. The skin was blackened and charred, split open in a dozen places, smoke coiling from the pulverized flesh. It looked like a lump of charcoal that had been struck by lightning. Both his legs were just as bad, the bones shattered into countless pieces from the impossible force of his launch. He was a broken doll, 100 feet in the air, with nothing but gravity below him. He began to plummet. The wind whistled past his ears as he fell, a limp, broken form tumbling end over end. He was going to die. A strange, detached calm settled over him. At least, I saved her. Then a slap. A light, stinging slap to his cheek. The sensation of falling stopped. He floated gently, a few feet from the cratered pavement. He looked up through a haze of agony to see the kind-faced girl, her own face streaked with dirt and tears, holding one hand out towards him. She was breathing heavily, and looked like she was about to be sick. Release, she gasped, and he fell the last few feet onto the ground with a gentle thud. The horn blared, signaling the end of the exam. The last thing Izuku saw before his world faded to black was her concerned face, and beyond that, the scene of utter, apocalyptic devastation he had wrought. In a darkened monitoring room deep within UA's central tower, the mood was one of stunned, horrified silence. Dozens of screens displayed feeds from every battle center, but all eyes were fixed on the replay of Battle Center B. They had all seen it live. The sudden, inexplicable energy reading that had dwarfed every other quirk used that day. The catastrophic destruction of the arena's most expensive asset. Now, they were watching it again in slow motion. Sweet Mother of Mercy! President Mike whispered, his usual bombastic persona completely gone. He pushed his sunglasses up his forehead, his eyes wide. Did you see the energy readings on that? They broke the scale. It was beautiful. Midnight murmured, though her voice lacked its usual sultry tone. But so incredibly destructive. The blowback on his own body. Mizu, the principal, sat in his high chair, sipping his tea, his beady black eyes fixed on the screen. His expression was unreadable, a placid mask of intelligent contemplation. But it was Shota Aizawa, the hero known as Eraserhead, who was the most affected. He stood with his arms crossed, his gaze narrowed, dissecting every frame of the replay. He saw the boy Midoriya, the record said, running, failing, showing no quirk whatsoever. He saw the despair. Then he saw the girl, the trigger. He watched the energy signature bloom on his screen, a sudden, vertical spike of terrifying power. He watched the launch, the impact, the devastation. He saw the boy's ruined limbs as he fell. It wasn't a heroic supermove. It wasn't a triumphant victory. It was raw, unhinged, and completely without any semblance of control. It was the power of a tactical nuke being wielded by a crying child. Recovery girl is on her way, Niza said calmly, setting his teacup down. He's accumulated 7 rescue points for his actions in saving the other young lady. A passing score. You can't be serious, Aizawa said, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. He turned away from the screen to face the principal. His eyes, usually heavy-lidded and bored, were sharp and intense. You saw that. We all saw that. That wasn't a quirk demonstration. That was a suicide attack. He gestured angrily at the frozen image on the screen, Izuku's fist connecting with the robot, wreathed in an explosion of world-breaking energy. He has zero control. 0. He's a danger to himself, obviously, but more than that, he's a danger to every other student and instructor in this school. One bad day, one emotional outburst in a crowded hallway, and he could level a classroom. We can't accept him. It's too great a risk. His potential is undeniable, Aizawa. Niza countered mildly. Potential is irrelevant in the face of recklessness. Aizawa shot back, his voice tight with conviction. He looked at the screen again, at the aftermath, the cratered streets, the shattered buildings, the boy's own charred and broken body. This was not the heart of a hero he was seeing. It was the epicenter of a disaster. His gaze hardened, and he delivered his final, grim assessment. This isn't a quirk, he stated, the words hanging in the silent room with chilling finality. It's a liability. The first day of school at UA High should have been the greatest day of Izuku Midoriya's life. It was the culmination of a dream so old, and so deeply cherished that it felt like a part of his own DNA. Walking through the massive, gleaming hallways clad in the crisp, smart uniform, he should have been vibrating with joy. Instead, every step was a tightrope walk over a pit of vipers. He could still feel the phantom sensation of it, the terrifying, exhilarating surge of power, the feeling of his bones turning to powder, the agonizing aftermath. Recovery Girl's quirk had healed him, kissing his broken limbs and mending them with accelerated regeneration, but it had come at a cost. The process had drained his stamina so completely that he'd slept for nearly a week straight. The physical scars were gone, but the mental ones were etched deep. He now understood, with terrifying clarity, the true nature of the power sleeping in his veins. It wasn't a tool. It was a predator, and his own heart was its cage. His entrance to Class 1A was a quiet, nervous affair. He scanned the room, his heart giving a painful lurch as he saw the kind-faced girl from the exam, Uraraka, he'd learned her name was, and the stern, engine-legged boy Ida. And then, of course, there was Bakugo, who was already leaning back in his seat with his feet propped on the desk, radiating an aura of belligerent entitlement. Bakugo's eyes flickered toward him, and for a moment, the usual sneer was absent, replaced by a dark, calculating look. He hadn't said a word to Izuku since the exam. That silence was somehow more unnerving than any of his usual shouted insults. Izuku scurried to his assigned seat, keeping his head down, his entire being focused on one singular goal: be invisible. He had to be calm. He had to be a ghost. No excitement, no fear, no sudden emotional spikes. He was a bomb who had to convince everyone, including himself, that he was just a normal, boring rock. The classroom doors slid open with a decisive thwump. A figure lay on the floor outside, cocooned in a yellow sleeping bag, looking for all the world like a giant, exhausted caterpillar. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. A dry, monotone voice emanated from the sleeping bag. That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. You lot aren't rational enough. The figure unzipped itself and stood, revealing a tall, scruffy-looking man with tired, bloodshot eyes, long black hair that hung in his face, and a web of faint scars around his eyes. He was dressed in a simple black outfit with a long, scarf-like capture weapon wrapped around his neck. He looked more like a man who'd been sleeping in an alley than a teacher at the most prestigious hero academy in the world. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa," he said, his voice utterly devoid of energy. He didn't wait for introductions. He reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a bundle of blue gym uniforms. "Put these on. Immediately. Then meet me on the P grounds." The command was so blunt, so devoid of any typical first-day pleasantries, that the class was momentarily stunned into silence before scrambling to obey. Izuku's blood ran cold. He recognized that face, the tired eyes, the grim expression. It was the hero who had been watching the exam replay in the monitor room, the one whose gaze had felt like a physical weight even through the screen, and he had been looking directly at him. As Izuku filed out of the classroom with the others, he felt Aizawa's gaze fall on him. It wasn't a passing glance. It was a heavy, pointed scrutiny, a look that seemed to peel back his skin and analyze the unstable power thrumming beneath. In that moment, Izuku knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this man saw him not as a student, but as a problem to be solved. The P grounds baked under the mid-morning sun. The entire class, now clad in their Yui tracksuits, stood in a loose, confused cluster. A quirk apprehension test? Several students exclaimed in unison. But what about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation? Uraraka asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Aizawa didn't even turn to look at her. If you're going to be a hero, you don't have time for frilly, pointless events. UA's biggest selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's how I get to run my class my way. His gaze swept over them, cold and dismissive. You've been taking standardized tests your whole lives, but you've never been allowed to use your quirks in physical exams. The ministry is run by stagnant fools. This test will give us a baseline for your potential. He turned his attention to Bakugo. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam. What was your best result for the softball throw in middle school? Bakugo's ever-present scowl deepened slightly. 67 meters, right, Aizawa said, tossing him a softball. Try doing it with your quirk. Do whatever you need to. Just stay in the circle. Bakugo stalked into the chalk circle, a wicked, confident grin spreading across his face. He stretched his arm, small pops and crackles of explosive energy already dancing in his palm. This was his stage. He wound up, his body a perfect coil of kinetic energy. "Dii!" he screamed, and with a titanic explosion that sent a shockwave gusting through the crowd, he launched the ball. The blast was concussive, a show of overwhelming power and precise control. The ball became a tiny speck in the sky, trailing a wisp of smoke. A few moments later, Aizawa's phone beeped. He held it up for the class to see. The screen read, 705.2 meters. The class erupted. 700 meters? Seriously? This looks so fun. We can use our quirks as much as we want. This is what I'm talking about. Izuku felt a familiar, cold dread begin to seep into his bones. Fun. They thought this was fun. For him, this wasn't a game. It was a series of potential detonations. Every test, the 50-meter dash, the standing long jump, the grip strength test, would be another chance for him to lose control. Fun? Aizawa's voice cut through the excited chatter like a shard of ice. The air immediately grew heavy. You think this is fun, do you? You have 3 years here to become a hero. Do you think it's all going to be games and fun times? His lips peeled back into a smile that was utterly devoid of warmth. It was a predator's smile. So be it. New rule for today. The student who ranks last in total points will be judged to have 0 potential. His eyes, now glowing with a faint red light, swept across each and every one of them, lingering for a fraction of a second longer on Izuku. And will be expelled. Immediately, the bottom dropped out of Izuku's world. Expelled? On the first day. It was a death sentence. The collective gasp of the class was lost on him, drowned out by the roaring in his ears. This was it. This was the trap. Aizawa knew about his lack of control. He had engineered this entire situation to force Izuku to use his power, to demonstrate his instability, and to give him a perfectly logical reason to kick him out of the hero course for the safety of everyone else. It was a rational, calculated move. Aizawa wasn't being a villain, he was being a pragmatist, and Izuku was the liability he was logically pruning. The fear was a physical thing, a cold, metallic taste in his mouth. It wasn't the paralytic despair of the entrance exam. This was a sharper, more active fear, a cornered animal's terror. He could feel it churning inside him, the quirk responding to it with erratic, uncontrolled fizzles of energy. A dark green static, shot through with threads of sickly yellow, seemed to cling to his skin, making the fine hairs on his arms stand on end. He felt dizzy, nauseous. The test began, and it was a parade of Izuku's worst nightmares. For the 50-meter dash, he didn't dare use his power. A single, uncontrolled launch like the one at the exam would send him halfway across the prefecture. He ran it with his own 2 legs, clocking in a pathetic 7.02 seconds, dead last behind even the invisible girl. The grip strength test. He held the dynamometer, his hand trembling. He tried to summon that low, steady burn of determination, but the terror of Aizawa's threat was a shrieking hurricane in his mind. He squeezed, channeling the fear. A violent, uncontrolled jolt of power, far more than he intended, shot through the device. There was a sharp crack and the digital screen went blank. He'd broken it. He dropped it with a clatter, staring at his tingling, numb hand in horror. Aizawa just made a note on his tablet, his expression unreadable. Standing long jump? He cleared the sandbox entirely, but his landing was a clumsy, uncontrolled tumble that almost sent him crashing into the school wall. More erratic power, more lost points for form and control. He was failing. In every event, he was clumsy, erratic, and dangerous. The other students were starting to give him a wide berth. They weren't just whispering about the new kid who seemed to have a powerful but clumsy quirk. They were whispering about the kid who looked like he was about to have a nervous breakdown. Uraraka shot him a few worried glances, but he couldn't meet her eyes. Her concern felt like another potential spark next to his powder keg emotions. Ida seemed to be watching him with a mixture of disapproval and analytical curiosity. And through it all, there was Bakugo. Bakugo was excelling, using his explosions with a casual, brutal efficiency that put him near the top of every event. But his eyes kept finding Izuku. The look in them was no longer simple contempt. It was a dark, simmering stew of rage, confusion, and a deep, burning indignation. This weak, sniveling, useless Deku, who he had known his entire life to be nothing more than a pebble on the side of the road, suddenly possessed a power that, in its raw, explosive form, seemed to rival his own. It was an insult. It was a betrayal. He couldn't understand it, and what Bakugo couldn't understand, he hated. Finally, only one event remained, the softball throw. This was it. The final test. Izuku knew, with a sinking certainty, that his score was abysmal. He was undoubtedly in last place. Everything depended on this throw. He had to score big. He had to show some semblance of control. He watched as Uraraka, with a light touch, made her ball float, scoring an infinity symbol. He watched as the laser naval boy Oyama shot a beam that propelled his ball a respectable distance before his stomach gave out. One by one, the students finished, until only he was left. Midoriya! Aizawa called out, his voice flat. You're up. Izuku walked into the chalk circle, his legs feeling like they were made of wood. He could feel 20 pairs of eyes on him, but Aizawa's was the only one that mattered. It was a physical weight, pressing down on him, waiting for him to fail. He took the softball. It felt heavy as a cannonball in his trembling hand. 0 point, he pleaded with himself. Find the calm. Steady determination. You've done this before. The tire on the beach. Quiet resolve. You can do this. He took a deep breath, trying to push the fear away. He thought about All Might. He thought about his dream. A flicker of genuine, heartfelt determination sparked within him. A gentle, clean, emerald hum began to build in his arm. It was working. The fear was receding, replaced by a desperate will to succeed. He drew back his arm, channeling that feeling into the tips of his fingers, ready to unleash a single, controlled burst of power. Just enough to get a good score. Just enough to pass. You've been hiding this from me for years, haven't you? The voice was a low growl, right behind him. Izuku froze, the delicate emotional balance he'd constructed shattering into a million pieces. He turned his head slowly. Bakugo stood just outside the circle, his fists clenched, his shoulders hunched. His face was a mask of pure, undiluted rage, his red eyes burning with a furious inferno of betrayal. All this time, Bakugo snarled, taking a threatening step forward. Acting like a weak, quirkless wannabe. Looking down on me. Was it fun? Was it a big joke to you, you damn Deku? The accusation was so fundamentally wrong, so twisted, that it blindsided Izuku. It wasn't just anger in Bakugo's voice. It was a deep, genuine hurt. The prideful, arrogant boy he knew felt deceived, mocked, and that injustice, that complete misunderstanding of a lifetime of genuine suffering, struck a match in the powder keg of Izuku's heart. The fear of Aizawa, the anxiety of the test, the desperation to pass, it was all consumed by a sudden, white-hot flash of pure, righteous indignation. A feeling he had suppressed his entire life. 14 years of being called useless, of being told to give up, of being physically and emotionally tormented by the boy in front of him, all of it coalesced into a single, explosive point of anger. It wasn't a hero's determination. It wasn't a victim's fear. It was the raw, untamed fury of someone who had been pushed too far. That's not it at all, Kaken! Izuku choked out, the words thick with a sudden, burning rage. You're wrong! The energy that bloomed in his arm was no longer the clean, emerald green of determination. It was a deep, furious crimson, shot through with flickering, unstable veins of black. It was ugly. It felt wrong. It felt like poison, but it was powerful. The air grew heavy, charged with a palpable, oppressive menace. The ground around his feet began to crackle. Aizawa's eyes widened. Bakugo, get back! He yelled, his capture weapon already beginning to unfurl from his neck. But it was too late. Bakugo, blinded by his own rage and now seeing the terrifying power manifesting in his rival, let out a guttural roar and charged. Don't you lie to me! The combination of triggers was catastrophic. Aizawa's shout, Bakugo's physical threat, and his own roiling, out-of-control fury. Izuku's mind went blank. Instinct took over. It was not an instinct to attack, but a primal, desperate need to defend. To push the threat away. He didn't throw the ball. He didn't even move his arm. He just exploded. A defensive, uncontrolled shockwave of dark red energy erupted from his entire body. It was not a focused blast, but a spherical, omnidirectional wave of pure force. It wasn't as vast as the one from the entrance exam, but it was more violent, more malevolent. The softball in his hand didn't fly. It was instantly vaporized by the sheer energy, turning to superheated carbon that vanished in a puff of black smoke. The wave of force slammed into Bakugo, who was only a few feet away. He was lifted off his feet and hurled backward, tumbling through the air like a rag doll before crashing hard into the dirt 10 meters away. The wind knocked out of him. The ground inside the circle and for several feet around it was gouged out, creating a shallow, smoking crater. The air stank of burned ozone and something else, something acrid and bitter. The other students cried out in alarm, stumbling backward, their faces a mixture of shock and genuine terror. They weren't looking at a classmate anymore. They were looking at a monster. Even Bakugo, pushing himself up onto his elbows, his arms scraped and bleeding, stared at Izuku with something he had never shown before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't contempt. It was raw, undiluted fear. He had felt the wrongness of that power, its sheer, hateful malice, and it had shaken him to his core. In the center of the crater, Izuku stood, trembling. The red energy still clung to him, a writhing, malevolent aura. His eyes were wide, glowing with a faint crimson light, his breathing coming in harsh, ragged gasps. He hadn't meant for that to happen. The anger had just taken over. Then, a new sensation. A blessed, sudden emptiness. The oppressive red aura vanished. The crackling energy dissipated. The immense, terrifying power was gone, as if a switch had been flicked. Izuku's legs gave out from under him, and he collapsed to his knees, gasping, hyperventilating as the adrenaline and rage receded, leaving behind a profound, soul-crushing shame. He looked up. Aizawa stood over him, his long black hair floating around his head, his eyes glowing a bright, menacing red. His capture weapon was wrapped loosely around his own arms, but his gaze was locked on Izuku. He had erased his quirk. For a long moment, there was only the sound of Izuku's ragged breathing and the wind whistling across the now silent field. Aizawa's hair settled back around his shoulders, his eyes returning to their normal, tired state. He had re-engaged his quirk, but he kept his gaze fixed on the boy on the ground. His expression was grim, devoid of any pity. It was the look of a man whose worst fears had just been confirmed in the most spectacular way possible. I gave you a chance, Aizawa said, his voice low and dangerously calm. I created a high-pressure environment to see if you could handle it, to see if you had even a sliver of control, a spark of potential to overcome your own volatility. He gestured vaguely at the smoking crater, at the stunned and terrified faces of the other students, at Bakugo who was still struggling to his feet. And this is the result. An emotional outburst that injured another student, and could have been far, far worse. You aren't just a risk, Midoriya. Aizawa crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the broken boy. His voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried more weight than any shout. You are a danger. To yourself, to your classmates, to anyone who has the misfortune of being near you when you lose your temper. As you are now, you have no place in this school. You have no right to call yourself a hero in training. Tears streamed down Izuku's face, hot and shameful. He had failed. He had proven him right. He was a monster. This was it. Expulsion. The end of his dream, less than a day after it began. Aizawa stood up, his tall frame blocking out the sun. He looked down at Izuku, a long, calculating silence stretching between them. Then, he sighed, a sound of deep, profound exhaustion. However, he said, the word hanging in the air. The logical course of action is not always the most effective. Expelling you now would be easy. It would also mean unleashing an uncontrolled, emotionally unstable powerhouse with a persecution complex back into the world. That is a greater potential risk than keeping you here where I can watch you. He turned his head to look at the rest of the class, who were still frozen in place. The expulsion was a logical deception, he announced, his voice returning to its flat monotone. A rational falsehood to push you all to your limits. A wave of relieved sighs and indignant cries swept through the class. But Izuku barely heard it. His attention was locked on Aizawa, on the sliver of hope that had just been offered. Aizawa's gaze returned to him, as hard and unyielding as granite. This changes nothing for you, Midoriya, he stated, leaving no room for argument. You are on probation. You are a problem. And we are going to fix you. His eyes narrowed. I don't care about your dream. I don't care about your potential for greatness. My only concern is mitigating the threat you pose. Your training will be different from everyone else's. It will be harder. It will be brutal. We will either forge you into something stable, or you will break completely. And if you show even a hint of losing control like this again, I will not hesitate to expel you and personally ensure you are never allowed near a hero license for the rest of your life. Do you understand? Izuku, still on his knees in the crater of his own making, could only look up at his terrifying, pragmatic, and strangely merciful new teacher and nod, tears still tracking through the dirt on his cheeks. He had survived his first day. But his dream of becoming a hero like All Might had just died. In its place was a new, terrifying reality, a desperate struggle for control, with his very future hanging in the balance. The day after the quirk apprehension test was not a new beginning. It was a sentencing. Izuku Midoriya walked the halls of UA, not as a promising student of the hero course, but as a pearly walking a razor's edge. Every corner he turned, every conversation he overheard, felt like a judgment. The other students of Class 1A didn't bully him. They didn't mock him. They did something far worse. They treated him like he was made of glass and filled with nitroglycerin. When he entered the classroom, the low hum of chatter didn't just quiet down. It ceased, cut off as if by a switch. Eyes that had been bright with conversation a moment before now darted away, focusing intently on textbooks, desktops, or the windows. A noticeable empty space, a buffer zone of at least one desk, was kept around him at all times. They had all seen it. They had all felt it. The oppressive, malevolent aura of his rage-fueled outburst. The smoking crater. Bakugo being thrown like a doll. They weren't just wary of his power, they were afraid of his emotional stability. They were afraid of him. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders, making it hard to breathe. He sat at his desk, staring at the scarred wood grain, his entire focus narrowed to a single, desperate task, maintaining the 0 point. He tried to be a placid lake, a calm, empty vessel. He couldn't afford a ripple of excitement if President Mike made a joke in English class. He couldn't afford a spike of frustration if a math problem proved too difficult. Every normal, fleeting teenage emotion was a potential catastrophe. His life had become a constant, exhausting act of self-suppression. The lunch bell rang, a shrill sound that made him jump. It was the moment he dreaded most. The unstructured social chaos of the cafeteria was a minefield. As students began to pack their things, forming cheerful, laughing groups, Izuku kept his head down, planning to wait until everyone was gone before scurrying to a vending machine and finding an empty corner of the school to eat in. Hey, Midoriya! The voice was bright, cheerful, and far too close. Izuku's head snapped up. Achiko Uraraka stood before his desk, her round face radiating a nervous but determined kindness. Beside her, Tenya Ida stood rigidly, chopping the air with his hand in a gesture of formal encouragement. Uraraka and I were just heading to the lunchroom, Ida announced, his voice a crisp baritone. As classmates, it is both logical and beneficial to foster camaraderie through shared meals. Would you care to accompany us? Uraraka smiled, a warm, genuine expression that sent a jolt of something terrifyingly pleasant right through Izuku's chest. Yeah! Come on, it'll be fun! My treat, to thank you again for, the giant robot. His heart hammered against his ribs. Gratitude. Friendship. Flustered panic. It was a potent cocktail. He felt a faint, telltale hum begin to vibrate in his bones, a soft green glow trying to form around his hands under his desk. His breath caught in his throat. What if he lost control? What if a surge of affection for her kindness made him blast a hole in the cafeteria wall? What if he hurt them? The fear of that possibility was a cold, sharp knife, and it was, perversely, his only defense. The fear smothered the nascent glow of the positive emotions. And no, he stammered, his voice coming out as a harsh, strangled whisper. He couldn't look at them. He stared resolutely at his desk. Thank you? But I can't. I have to study. The lie was paper-thin, and they all knew it. The silence that followed was heavy and awkward. Oh, Uraraka said, her voice small, the bright energy gone from it. Okay. Well, maybe some other time. He could feel their hesitant departure without looking up. He heard the hurt in her voice, saw the confused and slightly disapproving look on Ida's face in his mind's eye. Pushing them away felt like swallowing broken glass, but the alternative was worse. The more they tried to be his friends, the more dangerous he became to them. His curse was not just that his emotions were a weapon, but that the very kindness of others loaded the gun. When he finally dared to look up, the classroom was empty except for one other person. Bakugo was still in his seat, not eating, not reading, just staring out the window. His posture was unnaturally still. He turned his head slowly, and his red eyes met Izuku's from across the room. There was no heat in them, no explosive anger, just a cold, analytical intensity, like a scientist studying a strange and deadly new element. Then he scoffed, a quiet, bitter sound, and turned back to the window, leaving Izuku to stew in the cold, echoing silence of his self-imposed prison. The summons came at the end of the day. As Aizawa was dismissing the class, he called out, his voice flat and impassive. Midoriya! Stay behind. Aizawa then addressed Bakugo. You too. Don't go anywhere. A collective, unspoken question hung in the air as the rest of the students filed out, casting worried glances back at the three of them. When the door slid shut, Aizawa tossed the hall pass onto Izuku's desk. You have a mandatory appointment, he stated. Hound Dog's office. Now. For emotional regulation counseling. He then turned his full attention to Bakugo, who was now standing, his hands shoved in his pockets, a thunderous scowl back in place. We need to talk about you provoking a known unstable element. Izuku didn't wait to hear the rest. He grabbed the pass and fled, the word unstable element branding itself onto his soul. Hound Dog's office was less an office and more a den. The furniture was sturdy, the colors were earthy, and there was a faint, musky scent in the air. The pro-hero himself, Ryo Inui, sat behind a large desk, out of his hero costume, and in a simple sweater. He looked less feral than he did in his public persona, but his eyes still held a sharp, animalistic intelligence. Midoriya, he said, his voice a low growl. He gestured to a chair. Sit. Izuku sat, perching on the edge of the seat, his hands clenched in his lap. Aizawa-san filled me in on your unique situation. Hound Dog began, leaning forward, his elbows on the desk. Your quirk is directly linked to your emotional state. The stronger the feeling, the more powerful the output. Is that correct? Izuku could only manage a numb nod. Great! Hound Dog suddenly barked, his civilized persona slipping for a moment. He grinned, showing a formidable set of canines. That means your path to heroism isn't about strength training. It's about emotional intelligence. Most people go their whole lives without ever truly understanding the things rattling around in their own heads. You don't have that luxury. For you, it's a matter of life and death. He stood and began to pace, his movements fluid and predatory. So, let's start with the basics. The incident yesterday. With Bakudo. What did you feel? Izuku flinched. I was scared, he whispered. Of failing the test. Of being expelled. No. Hound Dog growled, stopping to stare at him intently. That was before. I'm talking about the moment the power came out. The red tide. What was that feeling? Sniff it out. Give it a name. Izuku swallowed hard, forced to revisit the ugly, searing memory. The injustice. The lifetime of scorn. Bakugo's furious, accusatory face. It was anger, he admitted, the word tasting like ash. Indignation. Good. Name it. Own it. Hound Dog barked. Anger. A powerful, primal emotion. A defensive response to a perceived threat or injustice. Not inherently good or bad. It's just a signal. Your signal, however, is hooked up to a nuclear warhead. So you need to learn to read the signal long before it pushes the button. We're not going to try and stop you from feeling. That's impossible. We're going to teach you to listen. To understand what your heart is telling you before it starts screaming. The session was grueling. Hound Dog had him recount every emotional spike he could remember, forcing him to put a precise name to each feeling. The joy at All Might's offer wasn't just joy. It was euphoric validation. The fear at the entrance exam wasn't just fear. It was paralytic inadequacy. He was being taught a new language, the language of his own soul, and he was a barely literate child stumbling through his first words. He left the session feeling raw, exposed, and utterly exhausted. The meeting in Principal Nise's office was thick with a tension that even the soothing aroma of his fine tea could not dissipate. All Might, in his skeletal form, sat hunched in a chair that seemed far too large for him, looking like a man awaiting his own execution. Aizawa stood with his arms crossed, his expression a familiar mask of grim pragmatism. Nizu, for his part, sat serenely behind his desk, a tiny paw wrapped around his teacup. So, Nizu began, his beady black eyes twinkling with an unnerving degree of intellectual curiosity. The quirk, one for all, has not only been transferred but has seemingly mutated upon integrating with young Midoriya's psyche. Instead of stockpiling kinetic energy, it now appears to be drawing directly from his emotional state as a fuel source. A truly unprecedented phenomenon. All Might flinched at the principal's almost cheerful tone. He placed his own cup on the table, his hand trembling slightly. Nizu Aizawa-san. I must be frank. He began, his voice low and heavy with shame. This is my fault. All of it. I saw the boy's heart, his heroic spirit. It was the purest I had ever seen. I thought he would be the perfect vessel. He looked down at his hands, his expression tormented. I never considered that the very thing that made him worthy, his immense capacity for empathy, his powerful emotions, would also make the quirk so volatile. He feels everything so deeply. It's who he is. I've saddled a sensitive, earnest child with a power that turns his own soul into a weapon against him. I have endangered him, and I have endangered this school. If you deem him too great a risk, I will understand. The responsibility is mine alone. The guilt was a palpable thing, a gray shroud over the symbol of peace. Aizawa let the silence hang for a moment before he spoke, his voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. Your guilt is a logical emotional response, All Might, but it is unproductive, he stated bluntly. What's done is done. The boy is here. The quirk is what it is. Fretting over the what-ifs is a waste of time. We need a practical solution. Nizu tilted his head. And you have one in mind, Aizawa? I do, Aizawa said, his gaze unwavering. He looked from Nizu to All Might. We've been approaching this problem from the wrong angle. We've been telling him to suppress his emotions, to find a zero point, to be calm. We're trying to cage a hurricane. It's illogical. It will never work long term. The pressure will only build until it erupts, as we've already witnessed twice. He took a step forward, his passionless demeanor cracking to reveal the sharp, tactical mind of a master teacher. Hound Dog is teaching him to identify his emotions. That's the first step, but we need to take it further. We need to teach him to use them. To channel them. We need to turn his emotional spectrum into a functional power set. All Might looked up, a flicker of hope in his sunken eyes. What are you suggesting? A new training regimen. Specialized and intensive. You and I will oversee it directly, Aizawa explained. We stop treating his feelings as a monolithic threat. We categorize them. We analyze the output of each major emotional state. We find out what each one is good for. We give him a toolbox instead of a single, unpredictable bomb. He paused, his gaze hard. Emotion isn't the enemy here. Ignorance of it is. If he can learn to consciously select an emotional state and channel its specific power, he can become a hero. If not, he remains a liability. This is the only rational path forward. Nisa's whiskers twitched, and a wide, sharp-toothed grin spread across his face. Oh, this is wonderful, he chirped. A pedagogical challenge of the highest order, turning the abstract nature of adolescent emotion into a quantifiable, combat-applicable skill set. The paper I could write. Very well, Aizawa. I approve. You have full authority and access to any training facility you require. Do not fail. The safety of my school, and perhaps the boy's very life, depends on it. All Might looked at Aizawa, seeing his grim, determined colleague not as an antagonist to his successor, but as Izuku's most unlikely and perhaps most necessary savior. For the first time since the catastrophic quirk apprehension test, he felt a sliver of genuine hope. The next day, after school, Izuku found himself standing in the echoing expanse of Gym Gamma, a facility colloquially known as the treadmill of death. The entire room was a customizable landscape of concrete pillars and platforms that could be raised and lowered at will. Standing before him were Aizawa and All Might, the latter in his muscle form, though his smile seemed strained. Young Midoriya, All Might began, his voice trying for its usual boom but falling a little short. We have come to the conclusion that our previous training methods were flawed. Your power is too unique to be treated with simple suppression. Aizawa stepped forward, taking over. From now on, your extracurricular training will focus on emotional channeling. We are going to map your quirk. You will learn what each of your feelings can do, what it feels like, and how to call upon it deliberately. This will be your new language. Learn it, or you are out of this school. Is that clear? Izuku, who had been expecting expulsion papers, could only nod, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a fragile, burgeoning hope. We'll start with the easiest to trigger and hopefully, the least destructive, Aizawa said, his tone all business. Joy. Excitement. He gestured to All Might. All Might nodded, stepping up to Izuku. He placed a huge, warm hand on the boy's shoulder. My boy, I want you to think back to the moment you finished cleaning that beach. The sun was rising. You had accomplished an impossible task. You had proven yourself worthy. I stood before you, and I told you that you could be a hero. Feel that. That pride. That overwhelming triumph. Izuku closed his eyes. At first, it was difficult. The memory was tainted by the terrifying explosion that had followed. But he pushed that part away, focusing only on the pure, undiluted moment of validation. The sun on his skin. The clean sand. All Might's proud smile. A warmth bloomed in his chest, a familiar and dangerous sensation. Good, now open your eyes, Aizawa commanded. Izuku did. His hands were glowing with a bright, sunny yellow light that crackled and sparked like celebratory fireworks. The energy felt light, fizzy, almost ticklish. It made him want to move, to run, to jump, as we suspected, Aizawa noted, making a note on a tablet. High energy, but it looks unstable, like a firecracker. Not suited for direct impact. Let's test its application. See that pillar on the far side of the room? He pointed to a concrete column 100 meters away. I want you to run to it and touch it. Sustain that feeling of joy, but keep it at a low burn. Don't let it explode. Izuku took a deep breath. He held on to the feeling of pride, of happiness. The yellow energy enveloped his legs. He pushed off. He didn't run so much as he skipped across the ground, propelled by tiny, joyful bursts of energy. He was incredibly fast, covering the distance in a few seconds, but his movements were erratic, hard to control, like trying to steer a balloon in a strong wind. He reached the pillar and slapped his hand against it, a grin spreading across his face. I did it! The moment he said it, the joy spiked into euphoria. The yellow light around him flared violently. Zap zap! A larger arc of lightning shot from his hand, blasting a fist-sized chunk out of the concrete pillar. Too much! Aizawa's voice cut through his excitement. The feeling overwhelmed you. You lost control. Again. But we have our data. Joy/excitement yields high-speed mobility with low impact, erratic output, useful for evasion, useless for direct combat. Come back here. Slowly, Izuku walked back, the glow fading as his focus returned, leaving him feeling strangely deflated. The next emotion was harder. Sadness, Aizawa said, his voice flat. Grief. Disappointment. Izuku looked at him, confused. How am I supposed to feel that on command? It was All Might who answered, his voice soft, his muscle form seeming to shrink slightly. Think about the rooftop, my boy. Before I knew who you were. Think about what I told you, the words I said that broke your heart. The memory was instant and agonizing. No. I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. The cold wind. The crushing finality. The death of a dream. Izuku's shoulders slumped, the light in the room seemed to dim. A heavy, profound sorrow washed over him, a familiar weight he had carried for most of his life. There was no glow this time. Instead, a strange, translucent gray energy, like thick, distorted glass, shimmered around his body. It didn't crackle. It was utterly silent. He felt heavy, so incredibly heavy, as if gravity had tripled its pull on him. His feet felt rooted to the floor. Defensive state, Aizawa observed, his eyes narrowed. He picked up a heavy, solid rubber block from a nearby cart. Midoriya. Stay focused on that feeling. Don't fight it. He then turned to All Might. Throw it at him. Aizawa, are you sure? All Might protested. He needs to know what it does. Throw it. With a worried look, All Might gently tossed the block. It flew through the air, aimed at Izuku's chest. The moment it entered the gray aura, its velocity slowed dramatically, as if it were moving through thick molasses. It connected with Izuku with a soft thump, the force almost completely negated. It dropped to the floor at his feet. Izuku stared in astonishment. Gravitational field, Aizawa deduced. Dense. Absorptive. It drains kinetic energy. A perfect shield. He then looked at Izuku's face. The boy looked pale, his breathing slow, his eyes dull and lifeless. But the cost is high. It's emotionally and physically draining. It invites despair. To use this power is to let the sorrow consume you. A dangerous trade-off, he made another note. Sadness/grief yields a defensive, high-density, gravitational field. High energy absorption, but results in significant emotional and physical lethargy. They didn't even attempt to trigger the red one. The power you used during the test, Aizawa said, his voice grim. The one born of rage. That is forbidden. It is a meltdown state. It is not a tool in your toolbox. It is the state where the toolbox catches fire and explodes. We will not be training it. We will only be training you to recognize its onset and pull back from that emotional cliff. Am I understood? Yes, sir, Izuku whispered, the memory of the red tide making him feel sick. Good, Aizawa said. That leaves one more. The state you used at the entrance exam. All Might nodded. The power born from the desperate need to save someone. We'll call it the protective state, Aizawa said dismissively. It's clearly your most potent form. Focused, powerful, and capable of immense output. It's your hero mode. He then leveled a hard gaze at Izuku. And it is also the one we cannot train. Not directly, Izuku looked confused. Why not? Because it appears to be entirely reactive, Aizawa explained. It is born from genuine, life-or-death crisis. We cannot replicate that kind of stimulus safely or ethically. You can't fake a selfless, desperate need to save someone. To try would be to cheapen the emotion, and the power would likely not respond. It is your ultimate weapon, but the trigger is not in your hands. Not yet. The training session ended, leaving Izuku physically intact but emotionally scoured. He had a map now, a crude, terrifying chart of his own heart. Joy was a frantic, uncontrollable speed, sadness was a heavy, soul-crushing shield. Anger was a forbidden abyss. And the true power of a hero, the emerald light of salvation, was locked away, accessible only in his moments of greatest desperation. He had taken his first step on a new, terrifying path. The weight of his own heart was a burden he would have to learn to carry, to shape, and to wield. It was the only way he would ever become a hero, and as he limped out of the gym, the gazes of his two very different mentors followed him, one filled with worried hope, the other with grim, rational resolve. The project to forge Izuku Midoriya had begun.